So our other case study focuses on the nearshore reefs of Hawaii. And the classic view of coral reefs sort of underpins this, this part of our research project. Coral reefs have, particularly Caribbean reefs, have been kind of the poster child for ocean tipping points for the last 10 or 15 years. There's a, as I mentioned earlier, this kind of classic dichotomy between a healthy, intact reef dominated by coral and other calcifying organisms and a degraded reef that's really dominated by fleshy macroalgae, seaweeds. And the kind of abrupt change between these two systems that's been observed in reefs across the Caribbean really taught us a lot about the potential for tipping points in marine ecosystems and inspired a lot of the research that's gone on over the last decade. But in Hawaii, and it also actually inspired us in a way to think about reefs as one of our case studies. And people in Hawaii have been looking around at increasing rates of degradation of their reefs and wondering, could we end up like the Caribbean? But in Hawaii, not all reefs look the same. There's a real diversity of reefs that don't sort easily into that two-dimensional view of the world. There are reefs with high coral cover and not that much fish abundance. There are reefs with tons of fish but really no corals, and others sort of in between. So we were drawn to Hawaii in part because we wanted to know if that two-state paradigm of coral versus algal-dominated reefs really applied there, and if a more nuanced view of tipping points in coral reef systems could be useful to management of Hawaiian reefs. So the other things that led us to Hawaii are the fact that there's just a ton of data, an incredible abundance of coral reef monitoring data in Hawaii, and we had an opportunity to bring all of that together for the first time. And there's also a lot of existing scientific capacity to tie into, and people who have studied those systems for a long time and know them really well. The Hawaiian reefs are also really sentinel reef sites, both globally and for US managers. And there were opportunities, and will be kind of growing opportunities in the future, I think, for work on resilience and tipping points in Hawaiian reefs to inform management at different levels in Hawaii, from local to state to federal levels. But we actually started this, we initiated with a partnership with, of all partners, the Humpback Whale National Marine Sanctuary. So this map on the right shows in blue the boundaries of the Hawaiian Islands Humpback Whale National Marine Sanctuary, which was the only single species focused sanctuary in the network until just recently. And they're in the process of moving to a more ecosystem-based approach and to managing all the resources within their waters, not just humpback whales. So they were really eager to work with us to better understand how things were working at an ecosystem level within their waters, and to bring this tipping point perspective in as they were thinking about the coral reefs that are super important in those areas. We also have begun, as we've moved along, to work with the State Division of Aquatic Resources, and they actually co-manage the sanctuary in Hawaii, so they're a natural partner. And then at smaller scales, we're working in two focal areas that are NOAA Habitat Blueprint sites and Sentinel Reef sites at both state and federal levels. And those are in West Maui and on the Kona coast of the Big Island. And there are a whole bunch of different initiatives that are focused on trying to understand the potential impacts to reefs and ways that they could be managed better. We're particularly partnering with the West Maui Ridge to Reef Initiative, which is a watershed to ocean initiative, and NOAA's Integrated Ecosystem Assessment for the Kona Coast. The plan in Hawaii, the work that we're implementing now, has three big parts. The first part really is trying to characterize those reef regimes across the Hawaiian archipelago using data from the main 8 and the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, understanding what are those different reef types that are out there and how are they driven by biophysical conditions and anthropogenic impacts. And then second, to try to identify indicators of reef state that managers can use to help them understand how close they might be to a reef tipping point, and to quantify those thresholds for specific drivers so they know, so they have some targets. And then third, to try to evaluate the different management alternatives that are available to folks to manage both the ocean and the land-based drivers in a coordinated fashion to stay within that safe operating space, like Becca mentioned, but in this case, the safe operating space that avoids a reef tipping point. And that's kind of the holy grail of this Hawaii case study, is to be able to put all those pieces together and say, what are the tipping points that bound that safe operating space, and what do we need to do as managers to stay within that, or to shift our reefs back into a more desirable state. So the first step has been to compile this ginormous biological database. And this is work that's been heroically led by Mary Donovan, who's a PhD student at University of Hawaii. She's brought together data from the state, from NOAA's CRAMP and CRED programs, from the Nature Conservancy, from her advisor's lab. So she works with Alan Friedlander, who has spent more time probably on these underwater in Hawaii than almost anybody. That should be an N, the National Park Service. And this has not all ever been pulled together in one place. There's over 22,000 fish transects in the database, and something like 8,000 benthic transects, 5,000 individual sites overall. So it's just a huge synthesis effort, and Mary spent a ton of time trying to figure out how to actually calibrate the method so all of these different pieces could be comparable and used in the same data set. And with that, then she's been trying to identify the reef regimes across the archipelago. Some preliminary work by one of our collaborators, Jean-Baptiste Jouffret, who's at the Stockholm Resilience Center, showed that rather than 2 reef states in Hawaii, there's actually 3. So there are clear coral-dominated sites and macroalgal-dominated sites, but then there are also these turf-dominated sites, and they're not just an intermediate between the other 2. And so Mary's building on that work, and she is expanding the database and adding in the fish to have a more ecosystem view of these communities. And her preliminary analysis, this is very draft, but suggests that there are actually 5 different clusters once you include the fish in the picture. So the next step that we've been doing is actually trying to map those reef regimes across Hawaii and assess how they vary at different scales. And this other piece about, we're also, in some cases, we have time series data. So in most of this Hawaii data set, the sites haven't been sampled over and over again. They're random sites. But in some places, we actually have 10 to 15 years of data, so we can look at change through time. And this is Mary's preliminary map of the different reef regimes around the islands in the Maui Nui area. So you can just get a sense for the density of samples, and also how the regimes are scattered across space. You can see some consistent patterns where you get similar reef types in one area, and then this whole section is all in this one high coral cover regime. The next step has been this huge effort to actually quantify the biophysical conditions and the anthropogenic drivers across the Hawaiian, across the main 8, and that hadn't been done before. So this is a big lift. Jamie Gove from NOAA has been leading the physical mapping side of things, and Lisa Wedding from the Center for Ocean Solutions and Joey Leckie from University of Hawaii have been mapping the anthropogenic drivers. And just the products coming out of this themselves are useful, and then they're integral to us trying to unpack why those regimes differ across the archipelago. So these are just to show you a few of the products, because they've worked so hard for them. These include maps of relative fishing pressure across the islands, of sedimentation loads at pour points around the islands, and land-based source pollution. This is nutrient coming from on-site waste disposal. A lot of Hawaii is still on cesspools, believe it or not, and those leak a lot of nutrients into the nearshore environment. So that's just a taster of what Lisa and gang have been up to. And that sets us up to be able to ask what drives regimes and their transition. So we can take all of that biological data, the biophysical data on the oceanography and the temperature history, and then the anthropogenic data, and try to understand across space what's driving the different reef types. And for this is work that's being led by Jean-Baptiste Jouffret from Stockholm Resilience Center for his PhD. He's using a couple of different techniques, boosted regression trees and structural equation modeling, to get at the links between drivers and the reef types. And this is all work that's just getting started now, so I can't show you any teaser results. And then the next planned piece is to really try to get at indicators and thresholds of resilience. And here, I just want to show you some work that Rod and his collaborator Kendra Carr and some of the rest of us have been involved in. This actually draws from Caribbean reefs, but we're going to apply something similar in Hawaii to try to get at some simple indicators and thresholds that reef managers can use. So from a big synthesis of fish biomass across Caribbean reefs and different coral reef health indicators, Kendra and Rod developed this relatively simple indicator. So this is kind of a green light, red light sort of tool. If you are at 100% of unfished biomass, and you get an estimate of that, what unfished biomass levels should be for your reef from a nearby marine protected area that's relatively well enforced and has been there for a while, then you're good to go. You don't need to worry too much about your reef state. If you start getting closer to a level that's about 50% of your unfished biomass, then you need to pay more attention, spend more money on monitoring. Below 50%, there's still the potential for ecosystem recovery, but you're getting into the danger zone. This is the place where we start seeing changes in a lot of the reef health metrics. And then if you drop below 30%, this is the level of fish biomass where across a huge number of Caribbean reefs we see shifts to that algal-dominated state. You get declines in corals and urchins and fish, and an increase in algae. So this is in the Hawaii case, we want to try to do something similar, but add other drivers. So not just fish biomass, but what if we look at the interaction between fishing pressure and nutrients or sedimentation on the reef? And then, we're putting it all together, once we have a sense of what those thresholds are for the drivers that are important and how those drivers vary across the islands, can we start to dig into which management actions would be most useful? And here we're using some trade-off analysis tools to look at a range of different spatial solutions, including both ocean and land-based management actions, and try to determine which ones are optimal, which give you the best outcomes at the least cost. This is stuff I'd be happy to talk more about if you have questions. I'm just flashing it up for you right now, but this is kind of our next step once we have those thresholds determined. And I think the hope with the Hawaii case study is that all of these scientific products and the way we've been engaging with managers as we go along will lead to some useful products for them and tools that they can use, including really quantified metrics of those different reef states. So you have an idea of how close your reef off your coast is to tipping into a different state and what that would mean. And some thresholds that can act as natural reference points for you for management, and a set of indicators to help you understand what confers more or less reef resilience. So that, and then the trade-off analysis, which highlights a set of best options. All right, that, I'm going to turn it over to Ashley. Yes?